Canada's foreign minister just delivered a masterclass in diplomatic chess, and Trump didn't even realize he was being outplayed. While Trump was busy ranting at the United Nations about how useless the organization is, asking what its purpose even was like a confused tourist, Foreign Minister Anita Anand was quietly dismantling his entire worldview with surgical precision. This wasn't just diplomacy, this was a calculated takedown disguised as polite Canadian courtesy. So how did Canada just expose Trump's biggest weakness on the world stage? And why is this moment more significant than it appears? To understand what just happened at the UN, we need to rewind to Trump's catastrophic speech on September 23rd. Picture this, the leader of the free world standing before world leaders complaining that his teleprompter was broken, then proceeding to deliver a rambling 57-minute tirade that was supposed to last 15 minutes. Trump used his UN platform not to address global challenges, but to air his personal grievances. He literally complained about getting stuck on a UN escalator with the First Lady, whined about not getting credit for peace deals, and questioned the very existence of the organization he was addressing.
All they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war.
Trump bragged that he's doing all the work the UN should be doing, saying he ended 7 wars, a disputed claim, and that it merits the Nobel Peace Prize. He bashed the UN for funding and failing to stop what Trump calls uncontrolled migration, lecturing and insulting his European allies.
The speech became so unhinged that diplomats were checking their translation devices, wondering if they were hearing correctly. Trump declared that the UN has tremendous potential, but complained that all they seem to do is write strongly worded letters that never get followed up, calling it empty words that don't solve war. This coming from a president who has made empty threats his signature move, from promising to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours to threatening Canada with annexation through social media posts.
The U.S. president goes on a tirade in front of world leaders.
If you don't get away from this green scam, your country is going to fail.
As Trump criticizes the UN, we break down whether it's still living up to its promise. Jimmy Kimmel returns to late night days after being pulled off the air. And what CBC News has learned about the future of Marineland's famous belugas and where they could go next.
It's not as simple as just calling up FedEx to say, hey, I've got a shipment for you. Overnight, please.
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault at the United Nations in New York.
Thanks for joining us here at the United Nations as the world gathers and Donald Trump takes center stage. The theme of this 80th UN General Assembly is better together, but in a 56-minute-long speech dripping with self-praise and boastful claims, Trump took sharp aim at this institution and many of its member countries. He targeted migration and green energy, the recognition of a Palestinian state, and the state of the UN building itself. He chided the group for being ineffective, but also later signaled support. And the list goes on. Off that stage, the news keeps coming. We will dig into Trump's shift in tone on Ukraine in a minute. But first, Chris Reyes takes us into that moment and that room as the U.S. president grabbed the world's attention.
Donald Trump's return to the United Nations got off to a bumpy start. This broken escalator working its way into his grievances at the podium.
I ended 7.
Trump's UN meltdown revealed something crucial about his approach to international relations. He doesn't understand that diplomacy isn't about domination, it's about building coalitions and finding common ground. His America First mantra, which he proudly proclaimed at his inauguration, has isolated the United States from its closest allies. The contrast with how seasoned diplomats operate couldn't be starker. While Trump was demanding instant results and credit for everything, actual diplomatic progress requires patience, diplomatic norms, and careful coalition building.
Position is us. They're stuck with the Donald. After his mindless 1-hour rant at the United Nations this week, there's not much left to be said, except now that Trump actually, he wants a triple investigation into the UN because one of his staffers tripped the blockage of the escalator. One of his staffers messed up his access to his teleprompter. And wait for it, Trump wants to know why there weren't speakers in the hall so everybody could hear him speak English. Well, this just in, the United Nations is 200 countries where people speak dozens of different languages, and they're all listening through an earpiece where the sound is impeccable and they can hear every word. Trump likes to hear himself blasted out as if he was in an arena. Look, that's the world we're living in. Reasonable, moderate, intelligent people like Carney, like Starmer, like others who got together this week are saying, how are we going to deal with this? Is it temporary? Is something that we're going to have to deal with longer term? The world of Trump and America that goes along with Trumpism long after Trump is gone. So they're saying, look, we've got to...
Enter Anita Anand, Canada's foreign minister, who had been watching Trump's performance with the kind of polite concern you'd show a relative having a public breakdown. When her turn came to address the General Assembly on Monday, she didn't need to directly mention Trump by name. Instead, she delivered what diplomats call a diplomatic dagger, criticism so elegant and precise that it cuts deeper than any direct attack. Annan's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. She spoke about multilateralism being our best hope to address global challenges rather than rejecting international norms. Every word was chosen carefully. When she switched to French, Canada's second official language, she said that today the multilateral system is threatened and some countries are turning toward protectionism and unilateralism. She wasn't just speaking to the UN, she was speaking directly to Trump's base, showing the world that there's an alternative to his chaos. But here's what makes this moment truly significant. Annan was walking an impossible tightrope. Canada sends 75% of its exports to the United States. Trump has threatened 25% tariffs on Canadian products and has repeatedly joked about making Canada the 51st state. Any wrong move could trigger economic warfare that would devastate Canadian communities. Yet Annan managed to push back against Trump's worldview while avoiding direct provocation. This delicate balance reflects the broader challenge facing America's allies. How do you deal with a president who treats international relations like a real estate negotiation, complete with threats, insults, and ultimatums? Trump's approach has been to bully allies into submission, assuming they'll eventually cave because they need American markets. But what he doesn't understand is that this strategy creates long-term resentment and pushes allies to find alternatives. The backstory here is crucial. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney won his election largely by standing up to Trump's annexation threats and trade wars. When Trump started talking about making Canada the 51st state, it didn't intimidate Canadians, it infuriated them. Carney rode a wave of nationalist sentiment to victory, promising to defend Canadian sovereignty while maintaining the economic relationship both countries need. Carney's approach has been to give Trump just enough to avoid total economic war while refusing to capitulate on core principles. His government has been working behind the scenes, strengthening ties with other democratic nations around the world. Canada recently dropped some retaliatory tariffs to match U.S. exemptions under the trade agreement, but this wasn't surrender, it was strategic positioning. By removing tariffs on goods already exempt from U.S. duties, Canada eliminated a talking point Trump could use while maintaining leverage in other areas. What Trump doesn't seem to grasp is that his aggressive approach is backfiring spectacularly. His tariffs and annexation threats haven't weakened Canada, they've strengthened Canadian resolve and made Carney more popular. When Trump complimented Carney on his election win, saying he was probably the greatest thing that happened to him, he accidentally revealed the truth. Trump's aggression had indeed been the greatest gift to Canadian politicians who needed to rally their base. The upcoming review of the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement provides another critical test. Carney has emphasized that Canada's objective is securing the best possible deal while avoiding unnecessary episodic trade disputes that harm both economies. Annan's UN speech was the perfect example of how skilled diplomats can turn Trump's weaknesses against him. While Trump was busy insulting allies and questioning international institutions, she was positioning Canada as a reliable partner committed to the rules-based international order. She didn't need to attack Trump directly, she just had to be everything he wasn't. Measured, thoughtful, and committed to multilateral solutions. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Trump's speech was a masterclass in how not to conduct international relations. He attacked European allies for buying Russian energy, despite the fact that European nations have dramatically reduced their Russian oil purchases since the Ukraine invasion. He threatened countries with tariffs while simultaneously claiming he wanted peace. He demanded credit for ending 7 unendable wars without explaining which wars he was referring to or providing any evidence. Meanwhile, Anand was quietly building Canada's reputation as a steady, reliable partner. She spoke about Canada's commitment to Ukraine, support for international law, and belief in multilateral solutions. Every word was designed to contrast with Trump's chaotic approach and remind the world that there are alternatives to American leadership under Trump. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of Anand's approach was how she highlighted Trump's fundamental misunderstanding of power. Trump believes power comes from threats and intimidation. He thinks that because America has the world's largest economy, other countries will eventually submit to his demands. What he doesn't understand is that soft power, the ability to attract and persuade rather than coerce, is often more effective than hard power. Canada's response to Trump's aggression has been a textbook example of soft power in action. Instead of escalating tensions, they've positioned themselves as the reasonable party while quietly building alternative relationships. When Trump threatens tariffs, Canada responds by diversifying trade partnerships. When he talks about annexation, they respond by strengthening ties with other democracies. The economic reality underlying this diplomatic drama is more complex than Trump's simple narrative suggests. Yes, Canada exports more to the United States than it imports, creating what Trump calls a trade deficit. But this ignores the integrated nature of the North American economy. Canadian raw materials feed American manufacturing. Canadian energy powers American cities. Canadian workers in American-owned factories produce goods for global markets. Trump's tariffs don't just hurt Canada, they hurt American consumers and businesses that depend on Canadian inputs. His 25% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum have increased costs for American manufacturers. His threats to the auto sector could disrupt supply chains that have been integrated over decades. This is why many American business groups have quietly opposed Trump's trade war with Canada, even as they publicly support his broader agenda. Anand's diplomatic approach recognizes these economic realities while refusing to be intimidated by Trump's threats. She knows that Canada has leverage in this relationship, even if it's not the kind of leverage Trump understands. Canada supplies critical resources that America needs, from energy to minerals to agricultural products. More importantly, Canada represents stability and predictability in an increasingly chaotic world. The broader implications of this diplomatic dance extend far beyond U.S.-Canada relations. Other American allies are watching to see how Canada handles Trump's pressure. If bullying works against Canada, it will embolden Trump to use similar tactics against other partners. If Canada successfully resists while maintaining the relationship, it provides a roadmap for other allies facing similar pressure. European leaders in particular are closely studying Canada's approach. They face similar challenges from Trump, who has questioned NATO commitments, threatened trade wars, and demanded increased defense spending. Like Canada, they need to find ways to work with Trump while preserving their own interests and values. Anand's UN speech was also significant for what it revealed about the changing nature of international relations. The post-World War II order, built on American leadership and multilateral institutions, is under unprecedented strain. Trump's America First approach represents a fundamental challenge to this system, but it's not clear what would replace it. Canada's response suggests one possible path forward: a return to middle power diplomacy, where countries like Canada, Australia, and European nations work together to maintain international cooperation, even when great powers are unreliable partners. This isn't about replacing American leadership, but about ensuring that international cooperation can continue even when America chooses to step back. The timing of this diplomatic confrontation is also crucial. Trump's UN speech came just days after his administration had imposed new tariffs and made fresh threats against allies. His aggressive approach was supposed to demonstrate American strength and force other countries to make concessions. Instead, it revealed the limitations of coercive diplomacy and provided openings for skilled opponents like Anand. What makes Anand's approach so effective is how she's managed to turn Trump's greatest perceived strength, his willingness to break diplomatic norms, into a weakness. By maintaining diplomatic courtesy while firmly defending Canadian interests, she's highlighted the contrast between Trump's chaotic approach and traditional diplomatic practice. She's made Trump look like the unreasonable party without ever directly attacking him. This is particularly important for domestic Canadian politics. Carney's government needs to show Canadian voters that it can stand up to Trump without unnecessarily provoking him. Annan's UN performance accomplished both goals. She defended Canadian sovereignty and values while avoiding the kind of direct confrontation that could trigger escalatory responses from Trump. Looking ahead, this diplomatic chess match is far from over. Trump still holds significant economic leverage over Canada, and he's shown no signs of moderating his approach. The upcoming review of the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement provides another opportunity for confrontation. Trump has already signaled that he wants major changes to the deal, potentially including provisions that could undermine Canadian sovereignty. But Annan's UN speech suggests that Canada is prepared for whatever comes next. By positioning Canada as a defender of international law and multilateral cooperation, she's built political cover for whatever responses might be necessary. If Trump escalates his threats, Canada can point to its consistent support for international norms as justification for defensive measures. The broader lesson here is about the nature of power in international relations. Trump's approach assumes that economic and military strength automatically translate into political influence. But Annan's diplomatic performance shows that smaller countries can effectively resist pressure from great powers by using international law, moral authority, and strategic communication. This doesn't mean Canada can ignore American power or that diplomatic skill alone can overcome economic realities. But it does suggest that Trump's bullying approach is less effective than he believes. Countries that maintain their dignity and principles while offering reasonable compromises can often achieve better outcomes than those that simply submit to pressure. The implications extend beyond the immediate US-Canada relationship. If Trump's aggressive approach fails to achieve his objectives with one of America's closest allies, it raises questions about the effectiveness of his broader international strategy. Other countries facing American pressure will be watching to see whether Canada's approach succeeds. For Trump, the challenge is that his entire foreign policy approach is based on the assumption that other countries will eventually submit to American pressure. If allies like Canada can successfully resist while maintaining relationships, it undermines the credibility of his threats and could encourage other countries to adopt similar strategies. Annan's UN performance was more than just a speech. It was a demonstration of how skilled diplomacy can neutralize even the most aggressive negotiating tactics. By remaining calm, principled, and focused on long-term relationships rather than short-term victories, she showed that there are alternatives to Trump's chaotic approach to international relations. The real test will come in the months ahead as both countries navigate the upcoming trade agreement review and ongoing economic tensions. But for now, Canada has shown that it's possible to stand up to American pressure without destroying the relationship, and that might be the most important lesson of all for allies facing similar challenges around the world.